Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Yeah, we're still in Vegas. Got my white suit on. Got to be careful. Never know. Oh. Oh, wow. That was close. Stacy?
You got me. You got me. Right, Max. So I have a very good headline because we are at a security conference here in Las Vegas, the HoshoCon conference. And there's been a strange story going on in the United States about these sort of chips that China allegedly planted on all these important infrastructure relating to Amazon, Apple, and some other stuff. So we're going to look at this because all these huge corporations very specifically deny any of this story, but we're going to look at the first story from Bloomberg. This got a lot of attention in the United States, the big hack, how China used tiny chip to infiltrate U.S. companies. The attack by Chinese spies reached almost 30 U.S. companies, including Amazon and Apple, by compromising America's technology supply chain, according to extensive interviews with government and corporate sources. So they use, I think, 17 sources, just like those 17 intelligence agencies that we keep on hearing about. But they have these anonymous sources that claim that these companies, including Amazon and Apple, had been basically compromised by a chip that was placed in devices being built in China. And they point out, in particular, they actually have data and all sorts of facts that they claim happened. In 2015, Amazon.com Incorporated began quietly evaluating a startup called Elemental Technologies, a potential acquisition to help with a major expansion of its streaming video service known as Amazon Prime Video. Based in Portland, Oregon, Elemental made software for compressing massive video files and formatting them for different devices. Its technology had helped stream the Olympic Games, communicate with the International Space Station, and funnel drone footage to the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. Elemental's national security contracts weren't the main reason for the proposed acquisition, but they fit nicely with Amazon's government businesses, such as the highly secure cloud that Amazon Web Services was building for the CIA. And then the article goes on to claim that Amazon found a little chip on some of the devices and that the FBI and CIA and stuff were working with them. But now they categorically deny it, but it's a interesting story.
Well, a few things here. So, of course, Amazon competes with Alibaba. Alibaba, a Chinese corporation, and any way that they can undermine Alibaba in some way, the Chinese authority in some way plays into their global expansion efforts. But this, on a broader scale, is another sign of the end of globalization. Because up until recently, corporations had an incentive to cooperate, to be globally impactful. And there is a tremendous need to coordinate financial policy, economic policy, currency policies. The U.S. and China, for example, would keep the peg to the dollar to allow for exports into the U.S., which would give people cheaper goods in exchange for jobs, and nobody questioned this. Trump has overthrown this world order, and we're back to neo-mercantilism. It's every country for themselves. There's not going to be any globalization anymore. All these global groups, the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, are all being dismantled. NATO's being dismantled. As we enter this century, will be a century of neo-mercantilism. And of course, this is, on one hand, very dangerous, because now you've got all these countries that are going to be competing with each other to the level of where it was before World War I, which led to a world war. But on the other hand, it's very exciting because it means American workers are going to have a chance to compete finally in the global economy.
Yeah, so there is an emerging sort of consensus that's being pushed that China is somehow a quiet enemy and have infiltrated us. We see this across both parties. We see this across the entire spectrum of America. Is our economy has been hollowed out. Our position on the world stage has declined. People are starting to come up with their own alternatives to our instrument of control, which is the US dollar. Even Germany, allies like that. So it's interesting that all these mysterious forces that you can't possibly see, it's as mysterious as communism, an ideology which infected Americans in the 30s and 40s. It's this mysterious force of these these secret agents from Russia and China who are overwhelming us. They're the barbarians, they're the Visigoths and the Vandals. They're these people that are coming after us. And there's no hard data, but here they're saying, like in the original Bloomberg piece, they point out that Elemental's servers could be found in the Department of Defense data centers, the CIA's drone operations, and the onboard networks of Navy warships. And Elemental was just one of hundreds of Supermicro customers. Now, again, these companies deny it. This is the interesting thing, is usually, so like when Edward Snowden revealed all the data about the NSA, and working with certain corporations and telecom companies, they all issued vague denials, very, very vague, nothing specific, and any lawyer could see that they had all sorts of get-out clauses, especially that they were under NSA gag orders. Well, Apple has denied that they are under any gag order. Amazon the same. So here's the follow-up, the big hack. Statements from Amazon, Apple, Supermicro, and Chinese government. Amazon said it's untrue that AWS knew about a supply chain compromise, an issue with malicious chips, or hardware modifications when acquiring Elemental. It's also untrue that AWS knew about servers containing malicious chips or modifications in data centers based in China, or that AWS worked with the FBI to investigate or provide data about malicious hardware. Apple gets even more specific, and
well, look, I mean, China is in the software, it's in the hardware, as opposed to this so-called threat from Russia where they're spreading memes that influence people to vote against their better interests. They put a meme of Bernie Sanders as a buff beach bodybuilder, and this warped the minds of America to vote against their interests. But, China is actually infiltrating the hardware with actual chips. China's actually infiltrating the software with actual malicious software. That's okay. We won't talk about that. Because Hillary's got to be, ameliorated, because after all, she can't possibly be held to account for catastrophic failure, because her personality is one of that of a steaming pile of nothingness. I mean, the total politics is misdirected away from a genuine threat vector, that being freaking infiltration of the software and the hardware by the top competitor in the global sphere, China.
Well, okay, let's go into more specific, because we don't know that this actually happened. Something's going on, but Apple said, this is their statement. On this, we can be very clear. Apple has never found malicious chips, hardware manipulations, or vulnerabilities purposely planted in any server of ours. Apple never had any contact with the FBI or any other agency about such an incident. We are not aware of any investigation by the FBI, nor are our contacts in law enforcement. We are deeply disappointed that in their dealings with us, Bloomberg's reporters have not been open to the possibility that they or their sources might be wrong or misinformed, which is maybe them also saying disinformed. They were being disinformed about something going on. And I have another headline after this to tell you how that might be the case.
Well, Apple's claiming that Bloomberg is fake news, essentially. But go ahead.
Or, just like the Iraq invasion and New York Times were useful idiots for the CIA who wanted an invasion, or some sort of agency that wanted an invasion of Iraq, that they were being fed disinformation. And we know right now, in particular, especially the media and the resistance are in total awe of anybody from the FBI or CIA. So they're going to print the resistance like anything they have to say. But here's one thing. Trump is a smart guy, and he sees how the media is in love with the FBI and in love with the CIA and will print whatever they say. One big thing, scoop, this is from Axios, the Trump administration's secret anti-China plans. The Trump administration is planning to launch a major administration-wide broadside against China, according to two sources briefed on the sensitive internal discussions. These sources, who weren't authorized to discuss the plans with the media, told me the effort is expected to launch in the next few weeks. By the way, this article in Axios was published in earlier September, before this information about the Chinese chips came out. And they said the broadside against China, which is planned to be both rhetorical and substantive, will be administration-wide, including the White House, led by senior officials on the National Security Council, Treasury, Commerce, and Defense. we're not just going to let Russia be the boogeyman. One White House official told me it's Russia and China, so it's like a bipartisan boogeyman.
They're pivoting away from Russia as the boogeyman to China as the boogeyman because their cost advantages of making China the boogeyman is a lot more advantageous to Trump and the American economy than, pipsqueak Russia when it comes to comparing these two $17 trillion economies. And there's no point in, trying to make Hillary look good anymore. They've got to transition now to a 2020 and start to run on 2020. But if I understand what you're saying there, if I can infer what you're implying is that this is a false flag.
Well, I don't know about false flag. That's like such a loaded, crazy, and mostly.
You're saying Bloomberg put fake news by chips.
No. I'm saying that somebody may, I don't know the truth about this. Somebody claims, anonymous sources, 17 sources within the U.S. intelligence agencies and governments told them some information that there had been chips planted by China. Now, there continues to be more reporting on that. We don't know for a fact who is right, who is wrong. Apple could be lying about this. They could be hiding something. They could be hiding.
But you're marrying that with this pivot to China as being politically motivated.
But here, yes, this was a few weeks before this information emerged that there are discussions within the Trump administration to find a reason to go after China. They might think it's a vote winner coming in 2020. We already know it was a vote winner in terms of they took our jobs and now they're taking our secrets, they're accessing our secrets via secret sort of stuff on computers. And we know nobody understands a computer.
All right, so what do you think out there? Put in the comments below what your thoughts are. Is this Bloomberg story some kind of wacky false flag, or is it just utter confusion out there in the world of technology? Right? We'll be back after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to our conversation with crypto mogul Trace Mayer. Trace, welcome back.
Oh, glad to be here, Max.
All righty, so let's get back into what we were discussing about BECT, which is this new New York Stock Exchange initiative. They're doing deals with Starbucks and Microsoft. It's really, as you laid out early on, going back to when Bitcoin is 25 cents, there's 7 network effects to be aware of as we head toward world domination for Bitcoin. And we're well into those 7 network effects. And so let's focus on BECT for a second. They are going to open the door to possible financialization. Now, financialization is part of the network effects. Some are fearing that this will give Wall Street a way to thwart the progress of Bitcoin as they do in the gold market with rehypothecation. Your thoughts?
I'm just not worried about it at all. I mean, what's the worst that they can do? Sell a bunch of Bitcoin they don't have and fail on the contract to somebody?
Right, that's the point.
Mean,
in other
that's
words,
the worst. And what's that going to do? It's going to suppress the price, which means that people are going to be able to buy more Bitcoin at a lower price. So whoever gets stuck with the failure to deliver, or gets stuck with the contract where they can't deliver the Bitcoin, well, they're going to take a loss, but whoever bought the Bitcoin at the lower price will get the gain.
Let's talk about naked shorting for a second. So with naked shorting, the Wall Street's essentially selling stock or selling futures contracts that they're printing at the same time, that they're uncollateralized. They're not backed by anything. And if a price of something like gold goes up and they don't want it to go up, they can flood the market with sell orders from naked short sales of contracts that they are printing, like you would print fiat money. These are fiat orders. And it's been proven and documented that this goes on all the time.
I mean, I'm a consultant to GATA. I've been involved in their stuff for over 10 years. So, I mean, I'm very thoroughly aware of what's going on there.
Right, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. And I mentioned that because they'll link to this and we'll get another 10,000 views. Anyway, but with Bitcoin, that is not the case because really this would thwart the naked short seller in a huge way because the hodler of last result has control of their private keys, number one. So you could, en masse, take delivery of those keys. You can't do it in gold because it's cash delivery, and nobody has the...
And it's so much more expensive. I mean, look at Germany. When Germany decided that they wanted to be a hodler of last resort and said, give us 800 tons of physical gold. How much did it cost to move all of that, to transport it, to verify the quantity and the quality of it? Every day, $20 billion plus of Bitcoin gets melted down and recast into new UTXOs, verifying the quantity and the quality with 100% on every transaction. You can move $100 million of Bitcoin for 10 cents.
Right, and so
I mean, you can't do that with gold.
Does Wall Street even understand the liability that they are potentially opening themselves up to, or are they just going to stumble into this, get burned, and then learn the hard way?
I sure hope they don't understand it, because I'd love to skin them.
Well, that's what's happening right now. As they try to position themselves into this market, they're very sloppy in the options market, and for shrewd traders, you can scalp them all day long as they move into it. Second idea, and this is more of a contentious idea, I want to get your thoughts on it. I mean, it's possible if worst comes to worst, or if there's an open warfare between the hodlers and Wall Street, it's possible to fork them. We can fork.
Yeah, I brought my fork along as a prop.
Yeah, oh, here's a fork.
Yeah,
right. So this
Bitcoin
is
fork right
return
there.
your Bitcoin fork. Now, explain how that would work a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, there's several different ways that happens. One is when the fork happens, if you don't have the private keys, you don't get the fork. So like what happens if you're Coinbase and you're supposedly holding a whole bunch of Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin Cash comes out and all your customers are like, hey, you have to give me the Bitcoin Cash, and you might actually have a legal duty to do it because otherwise it would be unjust enrichment or some type of fraud or whatever, right? Like, how are you going to deliver the underlying? And then what happens if there gets to be a little bit of squeeze on the underlying, just for the fun of it?
Right. So Wall Street can rehypothecate all they want, because at the end of the day, they can get forked.
Yeah, they can get forked. If they fork too much, they'll get baked on backed.
They'll get baked on back.
They're really in a difficult position because how do they acquire a position in Bitcoin? And 50,000 Bitcoins isn't cool. Like hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, now that's cool, but like 50,000's not. And so if they think that they're going to come and play in this space, and they're going to bring the rules from the old system where you're settling into something that's not limited in amount strictly, that's not going to work. You're playing with a new technology here. And the hodlers of last resort, in a lot of ways, they're not just a freight train, they're like a glacier. You're going to, how do you, you're just going to get effortlessly pushed out of the way by the hodlers.
Oh, excellent point. Now, you've just returned from D.C. where there was some CFTC hearings related to Bitcoin. What can you tell us about what you saw?
Yeah, so I attended the Technical Advisory Committee meeting. It was broadcast open to the public also. The new commissioners are very interested in Bitcoin stuff. The Virtual Currency Subcommittee took up a vast bulk of the time. And they're trying to figure out mainly, of course there's the AML KYC issue, but the really big issue is custody. Like, how do these institutions custody large amounts of Bitcoin? And, we had a lot of those that we were building at Armory, but for whatever reason, I didn't continue to fund it. And part of that, I would say was, hey, if Wall Street and institutions want to buy Bitcoin, they can build their own custody solution.
Okay, speaking of that.
And it keeps the price down, so I acquire more Bitcoin in the meantime. So, why build the custody solution? So, they're really kind of in a pickle.
Yeah, well, they are going forward. So Gemini, the
Well, it takes a long time to build this stuff.
Yeah, well, they're building it. Like Gemini, for example, the Winklevoss twins in New York, they've got custody services they're offering, plus an insurance. They're going to start insuring these deposits as well, these Bitcoin holdings. That's part of the network effects, right?
Oh yeah, that goes right into financialization because you need insurance on the DCOs and the CEFs. And they talked about that. Right now the insurance at the TAC, at CFTC meeting, like the hot wallets, they usually get insured to at most maybe like 50 million, warm wallets 500 million, and cold wallets like 2 billion. So even right now, like the insurance companies are playing in the space, but large amounts of capital are not here. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. That's when things start getting interesting.
Right. They've also, Gemini's also created a stable coin that's compliant with New York laws. So your thoughts on these so-called stable coins, what do you think there?
It's crazy. Who's New York to think that they can let somebody issue like Federal Reserve notes on a blockchain and have that not be counterfeiting under federal law? You got like federal law preemption issues. You've got all different countries. Like there's a Chinese stable coin like coming out on Binance or OKCoin or something. There's definitely a market for it. Look at Tether, but it's there's just a whole lot going on there. You have Chinese exchanges that don't want an AML KYC compliant stable coin in some cases. So it's,
Speaking of China, is China going to go from being wary and concerned about Bitcoin because it's a decentralized technology in a very centralized economy to being a country that starts to see it as a strategic reserve and as they do battle with the US dollar? And could that set off like almost a space race of countries mining to create strategic reserves going forward? Could you see that happen?
Yeah, so supposedly there are some African central banks that are actually starting to hold Bitcoin. They're doing it through things like OpenDime. China specifically, I think they're going to get caught flat-footed again, just like they did with silver, and they lost 78% with that transition. So I think India and China, banning Bitcoin exchanges in India, like clamping down on the entrepreneurial process in China, the Great Firewall, I think they're just same song, second verse. They're going to get hit flat-footed again.
The Chinese during the silver standard they had in the 30s, I believe.
Yeah, so they were the last to basically demonetize silver and move over to gold, and as a result, they're the ones left holding the bag, just like Africans holding gold glass beads, or whoever holds the inferior technology. I mean, Stone Age didn't end because of a lack of stones. Like, we're in a new age now, and Bitcoin's here, and there is nothing on the horizon with anything close to these network effects.
Right. Let's talk quickly, as you mentioned, nothing like it, but the altcoin market. Tom Lee of Fund Strat points to certain sectors of emerging commodities, platforms, privacy, exchanges, stablecoins. So he's separating this market into these different categories. Altcoins, your thoughts?
I mean, well, they're just getting obliterated. Why? Because almost all of them have no use case. And then a lot of them are built on top of Ethereum. Who's been able to sync an Ethereum full node from scratch anytime recently? I mean, it's just absurd, like the lack of scalability there. And then you've got Rootstock, and maybe ICOs will start getting done on Rootstock via Bitcoin. And so I think in a lot of cases, these ICOs have way overshot and then corrected. And then when that safety and liquidity starts to dry up, people will need to cash out in order to get into something more stable. And so we've seen a lot of the capital flowing out of the ICOs into Ethereum, out of Ethereum into Bitcoin or dollars. But if the next big bubble has ICO or whatever bubble is taking place on Bitcoin via Rootstock, what use case does Ethereum have? And so why own that?
That would be a big Zippo. Andreas Antonopoulos, Bitcoin.
Yeah, buddy of mine.
Well-known Bitcoin man. I spoke to him the other night, and he said that he thought smart contracts were impossible on Bitcoin. Trace Mayer, your thoughts? Start a fight here on the show.
Well, I mean, we got multi-signature going on, like P2SH. No, I mean, smart contracts are definitely possible. It's just, how do you really want to do it? And like Blockstream just launched Liquid, which is a sidechain. When Adam Back announced sidechains, there was a meme, and suddenly millions of altcoins cried out, and then there was silence. Boom.
Right.
So, we can do so many of these things on sidechains, and then you got interoperability, and since you've got Bitcoin impregnated into it, you've got a floor on what the thing can be worth, because you can always take it out of the sidechain back into the main Bitcoin blockchain.
I don't understand this argument that you can't do, smart contracts on Bitcoin for all the reasons you just said. I mean,
and then look at Lightning Network,
right.
And HTLC, so we've got a whole bunch of stuff that's already happening there. It's how complicated do you want these smart contracts to be? And Bitcoin scripting language is much more narrow as opposed to Ethereum's, but that's for security purposes. I mean, you can build an insecure layer on top of a secure layer, but not vice versa. And Bitcoin is the secure layer, and Ethereum's not. Look at the DAO, look at the scalability, look at the full nodes being sunk from scratch. It's a real problem.
Right. So people say that unless you own a node, you're not really fully Bitcoin supportive. Is that something you would agree to?
Well, how I kind of phrase it is, if you want to choose to be a first-class Bitcoin citizen, you run a full node and do your validation, and you hold your own private keys. If you want to be a third-class Bitcoin citizen, hold your coins on Mt. Gox. We see what happens to people that are third-class Bitcoin citizens. They get obliterated, and that's because they're not taking the security seriously. If you have $5 of Bitcoin, put $5 of thought into securing it. If you have a a bunch more, put a bunch more thought into securing it.
Chase Mayer, the Howard Hughes of Bitcoin, right here on the Keiser Report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Trace Mayer. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Or, you know what? Download the freaking app. Watch us in your taxi, as every freaking taxi driver in Vegas is doing. Until next time, bye, y'all.